Well, good morning. Guys, gentlemen, I really hope you join me with the axe throwing thing. I just did it for the first time a few weeks ago, and it turns out I am not great at it. But I would love to show you how not great I am at it, and the only way you get better is to practice, right? So we're going to jump into today's series in just a moment. For just a second, though, right at the top, I just want to let you know something. When I was a teenager, at 12, 13 years old, I was a part of a church. It was called Main Street Baptist Church in Grand Saline, Texas. I know a few of you tune in sometimes, so hello, Texas. Good to see you guys this morning. And when I entered 13 years old, we hired a brand new youth pastor. It was the first youth pastor I think that our church had ever really had up till that point. That was a dedicated youth pastor. And you think I'm a handful now. When I was a teenager, right, like this was rough. So, but there were a couple of people, Tom and Amy Bruce. Tom was our first youth pastor, and Amy, his wife, who really worked hard with all the students at the church. And I just want you to know, there's only a handful of people in the world who I would say are top tier of have shaped me, have molded me, have introduced me to Jesus, have showed me what that looked like. And of those handful of people, Tom and Amy Bruce are in that handful. And they are here this morning. I want them to stand real fast right where they are. Can you guys stand up? And just thank you guys so much for the example that you set for all of us, not just me, but for so many of us. So we appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. All right, so they're in town. They actually live in Louisiana these days. They think that it's funny that we think it's hot here. So, because, they have humidity back there. And if those of you who don't know what humidity is, it's on Wikipedia. You can look it up. But yeah, so this is nothing, right? Nothing compared to that. So we're starting a new series today called Bringin Home the Bacon, a series about finances and generosity and wealth. When I was a kid, I started to pick up on a few things around generosity and a few things on finances. And tech team, if we could work on the confidence monitor, that would be helpful for me. Perhaps you have seen some of these things as well, maybe growing up or maybe more recently. When I was a kid, I grew up in a middle-class family, middle class to upper middle class. We didn't really want for anything. My parents always had a way to provide for us. We had a decent-sized house on some property in East Texas. And I remember thinking probably everybody's life was kind of like mine. That's just kind of the assumption you make when you're growing up, that this is my experience of life. And probably everybody else's experience of life is similar to mine. And so sometimes we didn't always get everything that we wanted or asked for, but my parents were generous people, and they tried to give me and my brother whatever it is that we needed, including sometimes they would spend more lavishly, right? I remember when I was in elementary school and into middle school, there were these tennis shoes called Reebok's Pumps, right, shoes. They had them in all kinds of different colors. Shaquille O'Neal had a particular version that came out. And I remember talking to my parents and saying, like I need these shoes. This is what's going to finally jumpstart my NBA career. And so we talked about it, and these shoes were $170 in the late 80s, early 90s. With inflation, that works out to $42,000 today. Just quick math. So I asked my mom, and this was not the kind of extravagant purchase we would normally make, but I remember my mom got me these shoes. And I remember I also had this friend named Nathan when I was getting these around this time. And Nathan lived in a much smaller house than I did, and Nathan's house was a lot more worn out than mine was. And I just, as a kid, that just didn't really register for me. I didn't think a whole lot about that. But after I got these shoes, I remember him telling me at school one day, oh, my mom's going to give me some pump shoes tomorrow as well. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. We'll both have these pump shoes. That'll be really cool. And then Nathan came to school the next day, and Nathan did not have Reebok pumps. In fact, he had a shoe that did pump up, but it was made by a company called LA Gear, which I just found out this week actually still makes shoes. And it was called the Regulator, okay? So these were like the rip-off pumps. Right, and these were about half price or less than the pump shoes were. And he came to school, and I had not seen these or heard of these before. And I'm like, oh, those aren't actually pump shoes. And I got home and I told my mom about it, and she was like, hey, listen, Nathan's family doesn't have as much money as our family does. And so his mom, I'm sure, wanted to get him shoes that are like the ones that everybody thinks are cool. And so you need to tell him that those shoes are really cool and that you really like them, right? You need to boost his confidence some. So I was like, oh, okay. That literally just hadn't crossed my mind. I thought he just made a mistake. I thought he just went to the store and he was like, no, I'll take the pumps. And they brought these out. And he was like, yeah, those are there. I just thought he made a mistake, right? No. There was a financial difference here. And so I started to realize at an early age that, some people don't have as much as us. And that was, believe it or not, as a kid, that was a revolutionary idea. It just hadn't occurred to me up until that point that was true. And then my parents had some friends who lived close to Waco, Texas, and I remember going and visiting them when I was a kid. And I couldn't believe how big their house was. It was the biggest house I'd ever been in. They had actually an airstrip right outside of their house, they owned so much property where they could land his plane that he had in a hangar at their house. And my dad thought that was awesome. What I thought was awesome was that they were the first family I knew of that owned a Nintendo Entertainment System, okay? And I remember like playing for hours. Like the first time I ever saw this, like it was Super Mario was what I played. And I remember like, when you first learn to play Nintendo, you don't just like touch the controller. You don't just hit the buttons on the controller. You also jump with your hands, right? It's like, oh, every time we jumped, I had to jump too. And so not only that, but the next time we visited them, they didn't just have the Nintendo Entertainment System. We had gotten one of these by the next time we saw them. They also had a Nintendo Power Glove. I mean, whatever the newest, shiniest, brightest, most expensive toy was, this family had it. And so as a kid, you start to realize a couple of things. You start to realize that some people don't have as much as us. And then you start to realize that actually some people have way more than us. And that's just how the world seems to work. And then when I was in elementary school, I also remember my grandmother, who passed away a few years ago at the age of 101 years old, so she lived a nice, ripe life. She was proud, by the way, of the fact that she outlived Billy Graham. She thought that meant she probably lived a holier life than him. So she passed away at 101 years old, and she had a friend in town named Mrs. Beale. And Mrs. Beale was even older than my grandmother, right? So Mrs. Beale was like in her 80s back when I was in elementary school. And Mrs. Beale's name was Margie. And I was just talking to my parents earlier this week about the Beale family, and I was like, what was his name? And my mom said, I actually don't know, because when Margie talked about her husband, she always called him Mr. Beale. I was like, well, that's weird. So I don't know what his name is, but I remember the first time I went over to their house, and the only time I think, my parents were working on a house a few houses down. They were trying to get a rental property up and going, and so she invited my brother and I to come over and hang out and eat some lunch. And I opened the door of that house, and it was stacked floor to ceiling with just stuff. Newspapers, things that she'd found at yard sales, things that she'd held on to. Like she had lived through the Great Depression, and she just didn't want to let go of anything. And then I found out as well that Mrs. Beale, there was a raffle that would take place, like a drawing that would take place at our local grocery store. It was called the Brookshires. About every month, they would have some kind of thing that, you could come into the store and you could fill out a slip and put it in the box, and hopefully, no purchase necessary. Hopefully you'd win. They did it to get people to come into the store. And so I remember there was this one month, there's this really cool 1980s style, right? Because it was the 80s, like kids' bicycle. And I saw this in the store, and I was like, oh, I have got to have that. Well, Mrs. Beale always won the drawings at Brookshires, always. I don't, to this day, know how she did it. I don't think she was like a wizard or anything. I think she probably stole the little pad, went home, filled out, 300 of them and brought them. I don't know. She always won. So we're talking to my grandmother and saying like, hey, I really want that bike. Do you think Mrs. Beale can enter into the drawing and win the bike for me? So she talked to Mrs. Beale, and Mrs. Beale agreed to enter into it. So Mrs. Beale entered into the drawing. She cheated, I'm sure. That's just seems to be who she is. And she won the bike. And I was so excited. Like, you put the name up of the winner. And I was like, oh, Mrs. Beale won. So I was there. My grandmother was there. I was like, oh, well, I'll call her this afternoon. So she called her. She was like, hey, I'm so glad, Margie, that you won. Is that something that Josh can have? And she said, no. I couldn't have it. She was going to keep it. They were in their 80s. And Mr. Beale was a very large man who could not ride. This is an actual, by the way, image of Mr. Beale on a bike that size, okay? Like, that was not going to work. There was no way. And she said, no, why? What is happening here? Because she wouldn't let go of anything for fear that she would lose everything. And so at an early age, before you have words to put to it, you start to learn a little bit about how the world sees, interacts with, holds on to, releases money. And you start to learn that some people don't have as much as us, and some people have way more than us, and some people cling to everything they have. And you start to learn something about money. That money has two major aspects to it. Like there's the numbers, but then there's the narrative, right? There's the numbers. This is like the facts and the figures and the things that go on a spreadsheet, but then there's the narrative, and that's like the story we tell ourselves about the facts and the figures. And so this stuff is just kind of like, you can do this on a calculator, but the narrative that you have, that I have, that we have around money, that's the kind of thing that will shape and mold a life, a personality, interactions, the way you engage with the world. Like, that will change all kinds of things. Now, the scriptures are full of like this wisdom literature tradition. There's a whole book, in fact, in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, called Proverbs. And it's a book that is basically good advice or good life advice, but things that are generally true. And so they're not true in all situations and all times, but they're generally the way that the world works. And wisdom then is understanding generally how the world works and then being able to spot the places where it doesn't work quite like that. Right? You got to know the rules before you can understand why they don't always apply. Proverbs is full of that kind of wisdom. And Proverbs says a lot actually about money and a lot about wisdom. And those two things are more interrelated in Proverbs than one might imagine. So it says things about numbers like facts and figures, right? There's Proverbs chapter 27, we read this. Be sure you know the condition of your flocks, which I'm sure you do, right? You're responsible. You all know the conditions of your flocks. Yes, your 401k, whatever that is. Like, right? Let's update maybe the language a little bit. But you probably kind of know, like, how are my investments doing? And, you know, as of June 2022, the answer's probably not great this month, right? Like, you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds, for riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. In other words, there's like a shrewdness that comes with finances that says, like, I'm going to at least be aware of what the financial picture is, and I'm going to know what the facts and figures, what the numbers are, and that when it comes to money, that's just a responsible thing to do. I need to do that. I have a friend who was, a few years ago, he was at a music venue in Pomona, not far from here, called the Glass House. And years ago, the White Stripes had come, Jack White, if you know the band, and there's like great rock bands, and their whole thing basically is take rock music and like strip it down to its essence and play that and follow after the muse. It's very like head in the sky, like let's just go after it. It's very artistic pursuit there that the White Stripes have. And my friend was talking to a manager at the Glass House, and he was like, oh, what was it like having them here? He said, you know, fascinatingly, they have like a really good accountant that just follows them everywhere. Like everywhere they play, the accountant comes, and he looks over the books, and he makes sure that the riders that we signed, that everything that we said we would do, that we do. And he looks at like the ticket sales and the gate coming in and makes sure that like everything is great. And that's just a fascinating juxtaposition to me, because these are some artists at the top of their game, right? And they're like pursuing the muse and stripping rock down to its essence. But down the hallway, there's a guy named Jimmy in a sweater vest who's looking over the numbers, right? There's a shrewdness that comes with money, like there's the numbers, the facts and the figures, the finances. And the scripture, like this wisdom literature says, like, yeah, you should know that stuff. When it comes to money, it's good to just know the numbers, the facts and the figures. That's a wise thing. But it also talks a lot about the narrative around money, the story about the facts and the figures. How it is that one can live a life when it comes to your finances, a life that is a good kind of life to live. A life that is a life that blesses others. A life that is a life where you are pursuing wisdom more than you're pursuing gold and silver and rubies. So in Proverbs 11, we read this. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. Now look, you probably know people who have a lot of money who don't give freely. So again, these are general rules of life, but they're not for every single occasion. But generally speaking, the author of this proverb seems to be saying that like money is like, it got an energy to it. And it comes and it goes. And for those who have it come into their life, there's some kind of force to where when they also push it back out, when they also give it away, that there's like a generative creativity that happens there that somehow like more money tends to come. Whereas those who like, they embrace the coming, but they shut down, they clamp down on the going, like there's a lack of generativity there, and the wealth kind of, the spigot seems to kind of shut off. It shuts down. It's not this energy, this flow of energy that keeps going. And a generous person will prosper, but whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. And then Proverbs talks a lot about the pursuit of wisdom, what it is that we can learn from the world around us, including our finances. And it says that when it comes to money, like the pursuit of wisdom and knowledge, it's way more valuable than whatever cash you might find yourself looking after. So in Proverbs 3, we read this. Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding. For she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She's more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Money's good, in other words. It's good to know the facts and the figures. It's good to have, like, to be a generous kind of person. But above all else, pursue wisdom, because even better than money is wisdom. That's the way to live a good life. Ancient wisdom literature constantly links money and wisdom. It's constantly pushing us toward a narrative. Now, there's all kinds of narratives that you may have all kinds of, around money, right? All kinds of narratives. So just a couple of quick examples here. Here's one that you may have said yourself or you've heard someone else say. Well, I'll never be able to afford that, right? Now, there's a way in which this is probably true. If you're seeing like a $500 million yacht owned by a Russian oligarch, that's probably true. You will probably not afford that. But a lot of times we say this about all kinds of stuff. And here's what's interesting about this phrase, I'll never be able to afford that. It's taking the past, the present, and the future, and it's rolling it all up into one ball, and it's saying the world is a scarce place, and what I have is all I'll ever have, and there's no more that I will have. It's a narrative that we tell ourselves. Whereas the narrative that we find out throughout Proverbs and the narrative that Jesus points us to, that we'll look at a little bit later, is that actually God created a world of abundance out of his generosity. And that because our God is a generous God, the world is full of abundance. Yes, the world is also fallen, and there's darkness within it. And many of us will experience scarcity for either portions of our life or perhaps our whole life. But what kind of world do we live in? Is it a world of scarcity or a world of abundance? Whatever narrative you're telling yourself will very much impact the way that you choose to live your life. I'll never be able to afford that, says that like this world is scarce. I'm not going to ever be, my position is not going to change. Or maybe you've heard this. Maybe you've had a lovely experience. You went on a great vacation. You got a new home or a new car or a new pair of shoes. And you had a friend that like heard about this or saw this or you were talking to about this and they said something like, must be nice. Must be nice. In other words, baked into the must be nice narrative is like, oh man, the world isn't fair, right? I wish I could have that. I wish I could own that. I wish I could have experienced that. You don't deserve that more than me. You got to experience that. That doesn't seem fair. Must be nice. Like, it's just like there's some bitterness and some resentment and the idea that I'm not getting what I deserve and maybe you got more than you deserve. This, by the way, makes it incredibly difficult to receive grace when you're surrounded by must be nice people. When you're surrounded by people who, anytime they find out that something good happened to you, their response is one of envy or anger or frustration. Probably a number of you at some point in your life, and maybe now, you have people who you would call your friends. You enjoy spending time together hanging out. You've done things for one another. But if something good happens to you, there's a switch that gets flipped and it's immediate strain on the relationship. Must be nice. And so therefore, for us, like we start to feel kind of like a guilt and shame when good things happen to us, or when we have good fortune, or when we feel like there's a blessing that takes place in our life. There's a part of us, because we're afraid of the must be nice people, that like is hesitant to accept the grace, the blessing that it is. So we start to talk about things that happen to us, but we're always making excuses for it. Well, we got to go on this really cool trip to Hawaii, but my aunt paid for it, and it's her condo that we stayed in. Like, we could never actually do it, but it was just a thing that we went into. Must be nice. Or I got these really awesome shoes. I really like these shoes a lot. But, it was half off, and like there was a special like Labor Day sale, and it was like, it was just that's how I got. That's how I was able to afford them. Must be nice. And so we become the kind of people that are a little bit afraid to receive the grace for fear of what others might think. Oh, it's too lavish. It's too much of a gift. And it starts to impact the way we see the world. And I would dare say it impacts the ability that we have to receive the ultimate grace even from God, because the must be nice people narrative is in our head. And we have these people in our lives then that can't actually partake in the joy that we experience when something good happens to us, and that makes those experiences less enjoyable. So there's all these narratives that we learn when we start to think about like our experience with money and with possessions, because money is a teacher. It teaches us over and over again. Proverbs 2:3-5 says this, indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as you do for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. There's a wisdom that you can pursue that's even better than money, but part of that wisdom can actually be found in the experience you have of managing money. So whenever you've gone through a difficult season in your life, financially, maybe you've got too much money on the credit cards, you've got too much in student loans, you weren't able to stretch and make the rent payment, the mortgage payment, like whatever that is, like there are questions that wisdom would say you should ask about that situation so that you learn in the midst of difficulty. Questions like, how did I get here? What else is at play that may not cross my mind? What were my assumptions when I went into this, right? And all of us probably have known somebody in our lives that kept having financial problem after financial problem after financial problem, but they weren't asking these questions. And so what they were acting like is if all this stuff was just happening to them, and they almost had no control. This is just happening to me. It's happening to, I'm constantly playing that victim card. Look, there are bad things that happen to us, right? There are things that are out of our control sometimes that we walk through that happen to us. It's not to say that we are not sometimes victims, but when you are in the midst of a difficult financial season, for whatever the reason, there's always the question, like, regardless of whether all of this is my fault or just a small percentage, what can I learn here? And when you talk to someone who's walking through that and they're not asking those questions, you start to get the realization often before they do that, oh, this is going to happen again because they're not asking the right questions. And therefore, this experience that they're having of money, right, they have a choice. They can ask the right questions and it can be helpful, or they can not ask those questions and it'll just happen again and again. This experience will become a rut or a road. It'll either be a thing that happens over and over again, or it'll be a road to something different. This experience will be a pattern or a pathway. It's either going to be something that we repeat time and time again, or it's going to be a pathway to something very different. So a great question to ask as we are wrestling through money issues in our life, money challenges in our life, gas inflation issues in our life, right, is simply this. What is the lesson here? What is the lesson here? And the lesson can't just be, I just have terrible luck. That's the lesson. No. Look for something deeper than that. If it's just like, people are mean. That's the lesson I took out. Yeah, but what else can you find there? Because you have to name it before you can change it. I was at Disneyland a couple months ago with my 6-year-old, William. I have a theory. I don't have any empirical data to point to back up this theory, but here's my theory. I think that we spend a lot more time on the toilet than we did before the iPhone was invented. That's what I think. I don't think we poop more. I just think we're on the toilet for a longer duration, right? I think people take their phones and they scroll the news and they play Wordle and they do all the right, Fruit Ninja, whatever. And I just think that we're on the toilet a lot longer than we used to be. So a few months ago, I'm at Disneyland and I'm about to get in line, ironically, for Winnie the Pooh. And so I've got William with me. And William says, oh, Dad, I have to go to the bathroom. And I knew the answer before I asked, but it's like, is it an emergency? Like, you have to go now, or you think you could hold it? Well, okay, it's always an emergency because he can't think ahead at all, okay? So by the time he realizes he has to go, we are like minutes away from a total catastrophe, okay? So he's like, no, Dad, I have to go now. This is his favorite dance, by the way. So, okay, all right, so we ran over to the bathroom. We walk in. There are like 10 stalls there. All of them are full. Men's shoes underneath all the doors. So I wait for like a minute, and nobody flushes and nobody leaves. And so I finally step forward and I say, hey, I've got a 6-year-old out here who's about to have an accident in his pants. I'm not upset, but if any of you are done and you're just scrolling on your phones, can you maybe free up a stall? 5 toilets flush simultaneously. Yeah, they all stepped out and like awkwardly looked at each other and just like walked over to the sink, right? Like, okay, all right, let's get in there, let's do the thing, right? You have to name it if you want to change it. And when you're walking through a financial disaster, you really, what is the lesson here, right? What is the lesson here? What am I going to learn? Because I don't want it to become a rut. I don't want it to become a pattern. I want to make sure that I'm pursuing wisdom even more than I'm pursuing finances. The wisdom is important. We're told over and over in the ancient wisdom literature, you got to pursue the wisdom. Here's a great follow-up question. How much did that lesson cost? Okay? Put a number to it. I'll give you an example from my life. I finished college, and I decided I needed to go get a master's degree. And I decided to get a master's degree in the same subject that my graduate degree was in. And I was probably 6 to 8 months through that program before I realized, almost every class I'm taking, I had a version of already in my undergrad. And while completing this degree would get me a piece of paper, it doesn't actually make me better at the thing I'm trying to do. So I ended up sticking through that program for about 18 months before I dropped out, which means I left without a degree. I do not have an extra degree. Guess how much that lesson cost me? $45,000. Yeah, that should hurt. Hurts me to say it, all right? We're still paying on it a little bit. That was a $45,000 lesson. Put a number to it, but what did I learn about that? I learned don't go with the flow. Figure out if the thing that everybody is doing is actually beneficial to you, especially before you take out lots of loans in order to make it happen. You have to figure out, does it work for you? Your particular case may be different than everybody else's. right? I would have much rather someone told me that at lunch than to have to pay 45 grand for it, but that's how that went, right? My wife and I, we bought a house in spring of 2008. For those of you who don't remember, the entire economy collapsed about 6 months later, okay? And then we decided to take a job in another part of the country in early 2011 before the economy had recovered. And so we lost all the money that we put as a down payment for the house and that we had invested in the house over the course of those few years, and we had to bring $25,000 to the table. Now, that's a lot of money to have to bring to the table for us, especially at that time in our life. But here's the real kicker. The only way I could get $25,000 was to sell a bunch of shares of Apple stock that I had. Yeah, some of you are getting it already. To sell a bunch of shares of Apple stock that I had gotten when I worked at Apple in Chicago a few years before that, okay? So we were able to raise $25,000 by selling that and bringing it to the table. And at the time, we thought, what a blessing. We don't have to worry about getting this. Sometimes, late at night, when I just want to hurt myself, I do the math on how much those shares would be worth today. Last time I checked, that lesson about when to buy and who to check with, that lesson cost me about $250,000. I'm going to try to stop checking now because some of these lessons get more expensive over time, and it's just not helpful, okay? So figure it out once. How much did that lesson cost? But here's the thing. It's a lesson that you needed to learn. And it's a lesson that you paid the stupid tax on and you can now pass on to other people so that they don't have to spend the same amount of money as you did to learn that lesson. That's what the pursuit of wisdom looks like when it comes to our finances. What's the lesson there? What did I learn? We learned a lot about markets and making sure that we had enough money and didn't overbuy on that. We learned a lot about that kind of stuff. And I'll bet any financial mistake that you have in your past, there are lessons to be learned. And then put a number to it. How much did that lesson cost? Because money is a teacher. It's a teacher. Money is also a mirror. It's a mirror that you can hold up, and it reflects to you some of your own attitudes. It exposes some of your own narratives. So money reflects, and money exposes. So some of what it reflects, you're not going to like. When you start to see your friends do really well, and maybe you're not doing as well, there are attitudes that you have about, in your own heart that are going to come up for you sometimes. Like there's a jealousy and envy that you might feel. Or when you make a financial mistake and it seems like, oh man, that had so many more repercussions than I thought it would have. There are attitudes that you are going to probably have about God and how much he's looking after you and whether we can recover from all that and that just ends up being a mirror. It's going to reflect back what's actually in your heart. Because money means so much to us individually. The security of it, the protection of it, it can mean so much to us that it acts as a mirror. And when things around money start to happen, parts of our heart that we weren't even aware existed or didn't realize that we were conceiving of it like that, they start getting reflected back to us. So not only does it reflect back to us, but also exposes the narratives that we have. We talked about some of them earlier, but one of the narratives that money exposes is just this idea that essentially, we can do almost anything today if we're convinced that there will be a payoff in the future. I'll work 80-hour weeks. I'll put the family stuff aside. I'll get by without any sleep to climb the corporate ladder to go. If I think that there's a financial reward in the future, then I'll do almost anything today to get there. And that's just good sense. We think that's just a good return on the investment of my time and money and exhaustion levels. But what the narrative in our hearts is that's really revealed, that's really exposed with that, is that the joy is somewhere else. I can't enjoy today because today is actually about me working really hard for what I hope to get tomorrow. And when the joy is always just over the horizon, then I can never actually be in this moment. Alan Watts, philosopher who, not a Christian, but was really good at seeing kind of human behavior and naming it for what it is. He wrote this. In the 70s, he wrote this: human desire tends to be insatiable. We are so anxious for pleasure that we can never get enough of it. You're insatiable. I'm insatiable. My wife's insatiable. My kids are insatiable. Everyone you know is insatiable. Now, sometimes we're insatiable for different reasons, right? We literally cannot get satisfaction. We can't be satisfied. So relationships, my wife and I have been married now for almost 20 years. And we've spent tons and tons of time together over these last 20 years. But if we go a week or two without seeing much of each other, like even though I've spent more time with her than any other person in the world, I still I'm not filled up yet. I still want to spend more time with her. Like there's a quote, I got to spend more. She wants to spend more. Thankfully, I'm thankful it's both ways. And so right, we're just insatiable. My children are really insatiable, right? We try to bend over backwards sometimes to oh, they would enjoy this, they would like this. And whatever we do, they do enjoy it for a moment, but then it's always, Dad, can I stay up and play another game? Dad, can we go on one more roller coaster? Dad, can we? And I might even say yes a couple times, but at some point, you have to go to bed. And it's when we get to that point that it's no, we already did the one more several times, and now it's bedtime. Then all the one mores don't matter anymore because what was most important right now is this one. We're insatiable. Every single one of us. Alan Watts is just pointing to this, and then he goes on to say this. Yet the brain also knows that it does not have an indefinitely long future, so that to be happy, it must try to crowd all the pleasures of paradise and eternity into the span of a few years. So we're working for now to get all the experiences because we realize I've only got 60, 70, 80, 90 years. That's all I've got. And I got to cram as much experience, as much wealth, as much fun into that time as I possibly can. I got to do it. Me. Jesus had a lot to say about living life in this kind of way, where the joy is somewhere else, and it's always just over the horizon. In Luke chapter 12, a man came to Jesus to settle a family dispute that had to do with money. And Jesus wisely, anytime he got asked to be an arbiter of a family dispute, said, no. You should do the same. When any family tries to get you to be the arbiter, just, you know what? There's other people probably for that. So this is what he says in 12, 14 through 15. Man, he says, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? But we're talking about money, so he's going to go on. He says this, watch out. Be on your guard against all kind of greed. The Greek word here is pleonexia, and it's a greed for more. It's not a greed for a certain amount. Like if I just had this much, then I would be happy. It's just a greed for more. And the problem with more is you never actually obtain more because there's always more to be pursued. And so I can keep going and going. I can earn. But at some point you lose the plot of your life because you never really know what it is specifically you're shooting for, and you never actually arrive. You're just going for pleonexia, greed, more. I just want more. So he says, be careful about that. Guard against it. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And then he tells a story, a parable, and he says this. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. So I'm fortunate. I have a lot of food here, way more than I need, way more than I can sell. What do I do with this? So then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Now what's fascinating about all of the parables of Jesus is they all have a little surprise hook to them. It's like a little mini episodes of the Twilight Zone, okay? Little hooks in there. The surprise in this one is that this man didn't come about this material good through any kind of dishonesty. He didn't gain it by ill-begotten means. He just did what he always does, and he happened to have a really good harvest. And Jesus is about to criticize him. It's well, isn't he doing what lots of people would do? But I'm going to keep this slide up. I'm going to highlight some words. Look how he's thinking about it. This is what I'll do. My barns, I will. My surplus, I'll say. Myself, you. Me, I, myself. The early church had a number of people within it that seemed to have quite a few material possessions. In fact, the early churches that met in the Roman Empire seemed to meet, for the most part, at houses of wealthier people. It's not that the New Testament has anything against wealth or money. Money is morally neutral. It's not in and of itself evil or good. It's what you do with it. It's how you think through it. It's the narrative around it. And Jesus says, look, the problem is the narrative. It's not that he had a lot. It's that it was all for him, and he wasn't thinking about anybody else but him. And this, Jesus is going to show us, is a dead end. He goes on, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? No, listen, this is a parable. This is not the way God typically operates. It's not like oh, I got a raise at work. I hope he doesn't blast me or anything. No, it's not that kind of thing. He's just saying your tomorrow is not promised. Your future isn't guaranteed. And if you lived your whole life for more, then you really have wasted it. So he goes on and he concludes it like this. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. In other words, like there's an insatiability that we all have, but living this kind of way where you're just saving up for yourself doesn't actually solve it. In fact, the antidote to insatiability is generosity. It's recognizing that money comes in and money goes out. And the participation in the generosity and abundance of God is to receive and to give. Now, sometimes I throw a slide up because I recognize every week we have people who are watching online or who are here on campus who you're not sure what you think about Jesus. You're not sure where you're at with God. And I'm so grateful that you're here wherever you are in your faith journey or whether you're just starting to consider. So sometimes I'll throw up a slide that even if you're not sure what you think about the whole Jesus thing, I think would still feel true to you. So this is what I just want to say this week. Generosity is at least the unleashing of your personal assets to make a positive difference in the lives of others. Even if you're not sure what you think about God, what you think about Jesus, like generosity is at least that. And even if that is a comprehensive definition of generosity, right, I think it's a lot more than that. I think it's participation in the goodness, the generosity, the abundance of God. But even if this is all it is, the community and psychological benefits of generosity justify the discipline. Which means here at Inland Hills Church, generosity is what we want for you. It's not what we want from you. We want you to live a generous life because we believe a generous life is the best life to live. That's what we want. And so I want to talk to you for just a moment, and then we'll conclude about what Emily and I used to do and then what we do now, and then I've got a challenge for you, and you can choose to participate or not, and we'll talk through that in just a moment. Okay, so here we go. This is what Emily and I used to do when we first got married, and I'd love to say this was just the first 6 months of our marriage. No, this was the first several years of our marriage, okay? This is what we used to do. First of all, we spent more than we made. Good for us. We're like, well, everybody else did. I turned 18 in Capital One, and everybody else was convinced I needed credit immediately. And I was also convinced I needed credit immediately. It was like, does Best Buy take this? Sweet. All right, so I took the credit cards, and then we ended up spending more than we made. Then we didn't save because, if you spend more than you make, there's not a lot to save. And we didn't invest because if you spend more than you make, there's not a lot to invest. And we didn't really give much money away. Like occasionally we'd go to a store, and they'd be like, would you like to round up to the nearest dollar to support the new animal shelter downtown? And you're like, well, I'll have to say yes because you'll think I'm a total jerk if I don't. So sure, I'd love to do that. So it was very sporadic what we'd give away. And then we convinced ourselves that this was fine. This is how everybody's living, right? This is just American. At some point along the line, it came back up for us, this thing that we had been taught when we were kids. When I was a kid, I was taught by my parents that 10%, a dime out of every dollar I got from my allowance, should go back to the work of God in the world. It was a way to live my life in a generous way. And so when I was a kid, a dime out of every dollar, a dollar out of every 10 didn't seem like a problem. When I became adult, it wasn't a dollar out of every 10. Now we were talking about hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars. That seemed a lot less convenient. And what I found since then, like study after study will show this, the more someone makes, typically, I'm just a generalization, the more someone makes, the less as a percentage of their income they tend to give away. Why? Because that bottom line number just keeps going up if you're trying to keep it as a percentage of your income. But at some point, we were early on, in our marriage, we weren't making a lot. We owed a lot of money on credit cards at this point, and we had some people just invest in our lives and talk to us about this. And that we can't do 10% right now. We're in debt up to our eyeballs. We're trying to figure this out. We're like, hey, what if you stair-stepped your way toward becoming a generous person? It's not going to happen overnight. What if you gave it some time and some prayer and some energy and some planning? You plan so much. What if you planned your generosity? And so they started to talk to us about just kind of a ladder that we could think about, a way that we would talk about it now, which is like there's an initial, for the very first time, I'm going to give something away, really, something that matters to me. Then there was an occasional giver, like I'm going to do this, occasionally, not just once. Then we moved to consistent giving, which was like we're actually going to choose a percentage of our budget to give away. So we're going to sit down and we're actually going to do the math. How much money do we make in a year? What percentage do we want? 2%, 3%? What percentage of our money do we want to give away? How much is that a month? How will we give that? Where will we give it to? And then there was tithing giving. This is what my parents taught me when I was a kid, right? 10% of your income. Give that to someone else. You can live on 90%, but give away 10% of the income. In fact, the most common percentage mentioned in the scriptures is 10%. And so this was something that my parents taught me to do from a very early age. And then finally, we talked about legacy giving. There's people who were actually able to give way beyond 10%. In some cases, like my parents' friends, right, who have the airplane and the Nintendo Power Glove, they were actually choosing to live at one point in their lives on what's called reverse tithing. They lived off 10%, they gave away 90%. right? Like, because they were able to do that. Like 10% for them was not a sacrifice at all. So they decided to live on 10, give away 90, and they could still afford a Power Glove. I mean, it was quite amazing what they were able to do. So some people go to legacy. They've just been given the gift of giving, the gift of making money, and they want to use that to bless the world around them. So this is what Emily and I do now, right? And again, we worked our way here. There's been times where we've had a financial disaster that's put us back a little, and we've had to work our way back, but this is our goal consistently. We start with 10% to our local church. Why our local church? Because we believe that there is work that God is doing in the world that God is only using the local church to do. The local church is the only organization that has as its mission connecting local people in our community with the gospel of Jesus, speaking that into their lives, meeting their needs because of him. Like, that's really important to us. So we start with 10% to our local church. Then we give additionally to global non-government organizations, places like World Vision and Mennonite Central Committee and others around the world that we feel like we've had connections with over time, or we just believe that they're doing really great work. And then we keep our eyes open for additional opportunities. And some of those are monetary and some of those aren't. We've had people come stay with us, live in our house. Probably if we added up, we'd have, a year or two of our married life, we've had other people living in our house with us. And sometimes I would have rather just given money away because it was way less convenient. But that was something we could do that was even better than money for a season for some people. And so that's when we just keep our eyes open for that. So what I want to invite you to do then, over the next 3 weeks, I'm going to invite you every week to do this. There's no pressure for this at all, and I'm going to hopefully help you see that in just a moment. It's something that we're going to invite you to call the 90-Day Giving Challenge. Now, listen, this is because we want you to become a generous person. So we're going to give you the opportunity to try that, to test that for yourself here if you want to. But, and I mean this sincerely, if you're skeptical, give it to another church. If you think that the only reason we decided to talk about this was to put more money in our coffers here, look, I believe in the work that our church is doing. I do. But I just want you to know that this is not the reason for that for this series. So if you're skeptical, you don't even have to give it here. You can give it somewhere else. In fact, here's a list of churches in our local community that are good churches. They all have websites where you can give online if you'd like to. If you're just like, Josh, I just don't trust you, that's fair. My grandmother used to say that to me sometimes. So if you're just like, I don't trust that you actually have good intentions, these are great churches. All of them are doing great work in our community. We've partnered with them at times in the past. Give it away to somewhere else. I just want you to practice generosity, and I would invite you to practice being generous toward the work of God in your community. I think that is a great place to start. Here's something else that might be helpful for you to know if you're considering partnering with Inland Hills Church in your generosity. I don't work on commission, okay? I don't. I have a set salary. Our staff has set salaries. There's a church board that we do salary surveys to make sure that we're in line here with other churches of our size and all that kind of stuff. So I don't work on commission. So it's not like we're going to get through this series and then suddenly Josh is showing up in a Ferrari, right? That's not how this works. And I know that there are some churches that you've probably heard of on the news that don't operate in a helpful way. And I get that. I just want you to know that's not us. We really try to have tons of accountability all through our organization. It's really important for us. All right, so here's what the 90-Day Giving Challenge is if you want to participate. Find yourself on here. Where are you? Maybe you've never given anything away to the work of God. You've never decided to trust him with a portion of your money. You just need to give an initial gift. Maybe you've given once, but you're not really an occasional regular giver. Maybe you've never actually sat down and done the math to figure out a percentage, 2%, 5%, 7%, to become a consistent giver. Maybe tithing feels like you're here, you're at 3%, 5%, but you need to start working toward giving 10% of your money away. Or maybe you at some point signed up and you went into our giving platform and you said, I'm going to set this amount of money and that's a tithe, but maybe you feel like I need to actually go in and adjust that. You do that. Find wherever you are, and over the next 90 days, my challenge for you is to take your next step on the ladder, to grab your next rung on the ladder. Now again, if you don't trust us to do it here, that's okay. Give it to another church. But my challenge is for you to do that. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you this as you leave today. This is just the 90-Day Giving Challenge. So if you want to do this, you can sign up on our website for us to let us know that you're participating. You're like, I'm here. I'm going to take it up a step, okay? And then if at any time during the 90 days or shortly after those 90 days are over, you've decided you've made a mistake, we will give you 100% of your money back, no questions asked. You call, we won't try to twist your arm. We won't try to, why did you do that? What was it? We'll just, okay, absolutely. You have your money back. So again, if you don't trust us, give it to another church. I can't promise you another church will give you your money back in 90 days, but we will. We will. And our hope in doing this is that you can just take a step of faith, right? Faith is stepping out and testing to see, does it still hold? Another step, does it still hold? So our hope is to just give you a way to do that with your generosity, because we believe that the antidote to your insatiability is generosity. And there are things that you need to learn about God's goodness that you will not learn as long as you are holding everything to yourself. So you can go to our website to sign up for this and be a part of this. We'd love for you to. Now listen, we are not one of those name it, claim it, health, wealth, and prosperity churches because we don't believe that that's what Jesus taught, right? So I am not standing up here and saying like, give us today and you'll be able to see the heavens open up over the next several days. The wealth of God will come down. You'll get a bigger house. You'll get better shoes. That's not us, okay? That's not us, and we don't even believe that that's how it works. So I'm not going to say like, oh, trust God with more of your finances and suddenly you'll have more than you know what to do with. You know what? You actually might be poorer. Sometimes when you give money away, you have less. It's not about that. It's about obedience to Jesus, and it's about participation in a world of abundance created by a generous God. It comes in, it goes out. I've learned some expensive lessons over my time. I wish I hadn't had to pay so much to learn about real estate and about schooling. But I've also, my wife and I, have been blessed to be able to give way more money than that away to churches, to nonprofits, to friends and family, to people that we've met. And while I regret spending so much on the lessons, I have no regrets about giving the money away to others. If you were to say, Josh, you can have a check for all of it back, but all the good in the world that happened, that'll be taken out too, I wouldn't hesitate that for a moment. That number, I've never added up. I'll bet that number would be very tempting for a lot of people. But the truth is, God can do so much more with mine than I can. I'm happy to say, like, actually, it's all yours to begin with. So my hope is that this is something that God is working in you over the next several weeks, that you might consider being a part of a 90-day giving challenge. And if you don't want to do it here, that's okay. Do it somewhere. Start to invest in the world around you. Now, every time we talk about something hard, I think it's always good to have a chaser. This series is called Bringin home the bacon because, that's what we call it when you go and you work and you bring home the money, the bacon. So out in the lobby after this is over, we've got bacon and mac and cheese bites for you, okay? That's the thing you clapped for? Cool. All right, so... No, I get it. I get very excited about bacon also. So I want to pray for you, and then I hope you grab this. This will be handed to you on your way out today, and just prayerfully consider it. No pressure, and I mean that. God loves a cheerful giver. I'm not trying to beat you into it at all. I'm trying to give you an opportunity to test and see if living a generous life feels better than not. Heavenly Father, thank you for your abundance and your generosity, and thank you, God, for inviting us into the divine flow of your generosity into the world. And God, I just pray that as we learn lessons, as money teaches us, and it's a mirror for us, God, I just pray also that the way that we use it and the way that we are generous would shape us and mold us and make our community and our world better because we're willing not to just hold it all for ourselves and not to just trace after more, but to give and to see others blessed by what you can do in their lives through what we will give away. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.